I presented to the Senate and House leadership this morning my two options for a compromise agreement that would fund transportation for the next decade at a level necessary to move Minnesota forward. For highways, roads, and bridges, $600 million a year in real money, consistent over each of the next 10 years. For Metro Transit, an amount sufficient to move our transit system ahead and support this metropolitan area's continued economic growth and social vitality. I think you have the proposal in front of you. The funding would begin on January 1st of next year, 2017. It commits money that I would prefer not to spend from the general fund for this purpose, but as part of the compromise that I've agreed to, would commit $100 million for fiscal 17 for the second half of the fiscal year, and $200 million in each of the next 9 years. It would two options. One is a 5-cent gas tax, which would be my preference. I think it presents a more balanced funding proposal, but it also, in deference to the House ruling out a gas tax increase, presents a second option, which would depend entirely on the tab fee increase for the additional funding necessary. And again, those are detailed. And I stress again, $600 million is the level we all agreed upon, House, Senate, and myself previously, as what's necessary to move Minnesota forward and to meet the needs of this state over the next decade for improved transportation all over Minnesota. So I'm not willing to settle for less. It's incumbent now on the legislature, the four caucuses, on the conference committees, to decide if they don't like my proposal, one of those two, to agree upon their own, and to get a real solution, real dollars, sustainable dollars over the next decade, and give Minnesota what they want and what they need, which is a better transportation system all over the state of Minnesota. Lieutenant Governor?
Thank you. So over the last several months, I have gone all over Minnesota talking to people about transportation, from International Falls to Marshall and places all in between. And I've talked to county commissioners and mayors and local chambers of commerce and business owners, and everybody says the same thing. They say that we need to get something done. They say that transportation isn't partisan, it is about economic development. You saw yesterday, I think, county commissioners representatives from over 80 counties sent letters in urging us to find a solution that uses new revenue to do exactly what we need to do. So today, the governor offered two different ways of skinning this cat, in addition to the way that he offered last year. And I just hope that both the House and the Senate can come together to find a solution that will work for Minnesota.
Glad to respond to questions.
Governor, the House Speaker rejected this, said that with a $900 million surplus, he believes that their plan from last year has plenty of money to do this without tab fee increases or a gas tax hike. Further says that transit money is problematic.
Well, if he's not willing to find a compromise, meet halfway, then we won't have a transportation bill this year. But then people should understand that the Speaker, if he's speaking for his caucus, have scuttled this before we even had a chance to give it fair consideration. This is truly meeting halfway. I propose no general fund money. They propose $300 million in general fund money. My proposals each provide $200 million in general fund money. They said they wanted a solution that did not involve a gas tax. My second option provides for no gas tax, tab fees to make up the difference between the general fund and the $600 million a year. We all agree. Theirs is fiction. Their proposal is not real money. It's not all of it. Some of it is, but it doesn't add up to $600 million a year. They've got double counting money that MnDOT already has in its general operating budget. They count general obligation bonding, which is a one-time, which is not committed, and they won't tell us what their $600 million general obligation bonding bill consists of. So we have no way to make that evaluation. So, the House is, for the last 9 weeks of the session, has stood on its position, the Senate stood on its position, if the House is going to continue to stand in its position and pretend that that's going to solve the problem, first of all, they're not being honest with the people of Minnesota because it's not real money, $600 million. And secondly, there's no movement then toward a compromised position. So if that's their stance, then we won't have a transportation bill this year, and it'll just prove to Minnesotans that divided government can't work for the better interests of the state.
Governor, you say you won't settle for less. Is this your final offer?
My final offer is $600 million a year in real money, sustainable funding for each of the next 10 years. That I won't compromise on. How we get there, if it's real money and sustainable, I'm certainly agreeable to anything amalgam of. It's not my proposal, one or the other, or take it or leave it. I'm trying to show a middle ground here, and but the conferees ultimately have to agree on a bill.
Explain to us your rationale for the $200 million dip into the general fund, which would be ongoing. Why that figure? Why not more or less?
Well, again, my original proposal and my preference would be no general fund spending, but the House was insistent on that. That's part of the compromise that I agreed to. I don't agree with it, in deference to their position, as was a proposal that does not involve the gas tax. $200 million is the maximum I believe we can afford to divert from the general fund for transportation. Again, the House proposal has $300 million, so it's 2/3 of the way to their position. The Senate has nothing, so I consider that to be a major concession to the House position, as is the proposal that has no gas tax. I'm disappointed the Speaker's rejected this as not offering sufficient deference to his position. Those are two major concessions on my part, to include $200 million of general fund spending, and also to show a path without a gas tax increase.
Governor, he did acknowledge that you did make significant movement on the gas tax, at least in one of the proposals. But he said the license tab fees, then under the other proposal, he said there's no way Minnesotans would swallow increases over 90% in some cases.
Well, then he should say what his preferred alternative is, but it's got to be real money and a real proposal. And his House current position simply is not real money. That adds up to $600 million. It counts general obligation, which is one-time spending. And again, they don't have a $600 million bill on the table to show us how much of that would go to projects, and general obligation money cannot go to trunk highway projects. So it's not a complete proposal. If he wants to go back and stand on that and stand off with the Senate conferees, then there won't be a transportation bill. But it'll be his responsibility, his caucus's responsibility. I'm hoping they can get beyond that. This compromise that I propose, one of those two or something like it, requires the House to agree to things that they don't agree with. It requires the Senate to agree to things they don't agree with. That's the measure of a true compromise. But as the Lieutenant Governor said, Minnesotans have been saying all over the state, get it done. It's got to be real money, so we have real progress, and it's got to be sufficient to meet that marker, and that's why I stand on the $600 million that we all agreed to. There hasn't been any disagreement in the conference committee or by myself and my administration. $600 million per year over each of the next 10 years of additional money, real money, is what's necessary to move Minnesota forward. So how we get there, I'm open to suggestions, but just to reiterate on a proposal that doesn't stand up to that measure is really not helpful.
How confident are you that it will get done? How confident are you that it will get done?
You know,
You've got
it can
6
go
days.
either way. We're at the tipping point right now. It depends on the 201 legislators willing to agree to something that they don't agree with entirely. I think it's possible, but I think, it's either success or failure. There's no in between. And if I'm not up facing the voters, but I wouldn't want to go before the voters next fall and say we failed on the most important measure that this session faces in terms of what the future of Minnesota depends upon, because we weren't willing to compromise and reach an agreement. When an agreement is there, an agreement is reachable.
And when you all were working over the weekend and came up with this tab fee plan, did you think, aha, we've got it, the Republicans are going to accept this whole cloth and we're done?
I didn't know whether the Republicans would accept it. I didn't know whether the Democrats would accept it. There are parts, each of them would has definitely said they don't want as part of the solution. But that's the essence of a compromise. You don't get to have it all this way. You don't have it all that way. We have the House position all their way, the Senate position all their way. For the last 9 weeks, they've been that far apart, and I haven't seen any movement. This is an attempt to bring us to the middle and to get something accomplished. It's a real solution, real money, sufficient money to move Minnesota forward, and the people of Minnesota are waiting to see whether they're willing to stand up and get it done, or whether they can go back home and say, no, we wouldn't give an inch, so we get nothing for it.
If there is no transportation bill, what are some of the consequences of that? Specific projects delayed or?
Well, none of the new projects move forward. None of the improvements that Commissioner Zelli has detailed, and we can bring out our maps of the state, but none of those projects move forward. We're $400 million a year short of what's necessary just to maintain the existing highways, road, bridges system. So the conditions get worse. The trunk highways and other state highways and get more dilapidated, more deteriorated, and the general trunk highways have less capacity to meet the needs. We're talking about, what do we say, 750,000 more people by 2040. We have a growing population, increased use on our highways, roads, and bridges that will not be met. Public transit, especially the metropolitan area, will continue to be inadequate for the needs, and it'll force more and more people onto the highways, which will increase that congestion. We're gonna choke the lifeblood out of Minnesota's future economic growth if we don't move forward with this kind of transportation package. Everybody recognizes it's necessary, and inaction is really a failure on behalf of Minnesota, because it means, as I say, the guarantee is if nothing's done, conditions will continue to get worse. And I don't believe that's something that anybody can justify to the people of this state. Let me just point out one more thing I want to mention. I've said also that the $500 million, if you take the next 3 fiscal years, $100 million in general fund money for the next, for fiscal 17, half of the year, $200 million for fiscal 18, $200 million for fiscal 19. So that's $500 million for the next 3 years. If that money is not going to go to transportation, if this package falls apart, I want that money to go to the bottom line, to be a surplus at the end of fiscal 19. So that $500 million, as far as I'm concerned, is off the table in terms of using the remaining surplus, which would be $1.6 billion for those 3 years, available for taxes and for supplemental budget. And I think this proposal removes that barrier from the targets being established for the other key bills.
Governor, speaking of targets, where would you say you were at? The speaker just said he'd like to have targets by tomorrow. Does that seem realistic?
It's certainly realistic, yes.
Are you talking? Did you talk about targets today?
I told them, I asked both leaders in the House and Senate to include my staff and my commissioners, the Lieutenant Governor and myself, in setting those targets as well as filling the content of them. So I trust that we will be included.
Governor, Representative Kelly has said that Republicans might be willing to accept sales tax increase for transit, but wants to tie that to changes in Met Council governance. They put forward some specific proposals to include add elected officials to the council. I was wondering what your thoughts were on that specific proposal and on the general issue of making concessions that, as your past vetoes demonstrated, you're not interested in, but in order to get a deal.
I mean, as part of an acceptable transit deal, I'm certainly willing to accept changes to the Met Council. I don't know that anybody's agreed yet on what those are. The Met Council has been the favorite whipping boy of local governments for the last 40 years. I mean, that's the nature of regional governance, is trying to incorporate a broad scope where each county and each city is rightfully looking at its own individual interests. So everybody's always, been, as far as I can remember back, been critical of the Met Council, the composition, et cetera. And you get into the details of should it be this way or that way. But if they can reach some reasonable agreement on that, I'm not going to let that stand in the way. I think it's time for the counties and the cities to get real about what's needed to fund transit in this metropolitan area, and for those legislators who are scoring political points off of this, especially those who try to pit greater Minnesota against the metropolitan area. If we take 700, I think it's 500,000 people in the metropolitan area over the next 25 years, and we put all of them on the highways with no additional public transit, no light rail, no buses, we're going to have an even more congested and inadequate transportation system for the metropolitan area, which is going to choke the economic growth of the metropolitan area, upon which LGA and CPA and all the other school aids, all the rest of the state depends. having a vital, healthy metropolitan area is in everybody's best interest in the state of Minnesota. And having a sufficient, a modern public transit system is essential for that growth. It's essential for everybody who's on the highway. It's essential for everybody who wants to be not on the highway, who wants to use public transit. I don't know if you want to add it.
So what do you do now? Do you wait for them to get back to you? Do you have any more meetings planned?
I'm available all week. I have my schedule is clear. I'm available for meetings on transportation, on bonding, on taxes, on supplemental budget, on anything else. They all understandably want to caucus. I totally accept that. They got this, the details of this these proposals this morning. So I'm waiting to get a response from each of them, and we'll see where it goes from here.
Governor, lowering tab fees was the single most popular thing Governor Ventura did. Under your proposal, or at least one of the proposals, they would go up, in some cases, 96%. How would voters respond to that in November, do you think?
Well, 96% of about, from up to 100, from 100 or so. There's no free lunch. Other than, general fund comes from taxpayers. Tab fees come from taxpayers. Gas tax comes from taxpayers. There's no one else who's going to pay for improving our transportation system except for all of us. And how you allocate that, and that's why I think the gas tax is part of the tab, reduce the increase in the tab fees is a more balanced approach. But the federal government's not going to come up with the money. They're not going to shoulder this burden to the extent necessary. It depends on all of us in Minnesota. And people need to realize that if we do nothing, if you just maintain the status quo in terms of funding, our highways get worse, our bridges become more unsafe, our transit becomes more antiquated and less adequate. I'm not saying that everybody's going to think this is going to be happy to commit additional resources, but the alternative is to let things get worse.
I just wanted, if I could, Tom, I think both the governor and I would prefer a more balanced approach that doesn't raise all of those dollars off of the tab fees. However, if the House Republicans are unwilling to accept a gas tax, there isn't any other option. I also just want to mention, Tim, you were asking about the consequences of not getting this bill done. A big consequence would be that we would be leaving, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of $900 million in federal transit funding. We would be watching it walk out the door of Minnesota and go to states like Texas and Nevada and other states that have been able to figure out how to pay their local share of transit.
And I just also say in response on the Ventura's popularity, avoiding the necessary increased spending on transportation has been short-term politically popular for governors for 20 years. And that's one of the reasons we're behind the 8 ball now. It's one of the reasons we have such a transportation funding deficit, is because with the one exception of a nickel increase in the gas tax in 2007 or 8, nothing's been done. While all the system has continued to get older, while the increased use of the system is increased, and that's one of the reasons that this is an expensive proposition to catch up and try to get ahead of where we need to be from where we are today. This is paying for years of neglect.
Did you consider an increase in MVEST or in lease or rental car fees?
Well, the general fund money, this is 80% of the sales tax on auto parts, if you want to attribute it to a number. But we decided it's general fund money. You can designate, unless it's constitutionally dedicated. It's general fund money.
You're not proposing an increase in those things.
Not increasing those, no.
Anything else on this topic?
Yeah.
One of the Republican members told me that you could squeeze $100 million out just by leaving license tab fees on new cars at the same rate for the first 2 years. But I noticed your plan here applies that tab fee across 8 or 9 years, or the normal. And any thought of, I don't want you to negotiate.
If they want to revise the depreciation schedule and still raise the money necessary. Again, I'm not wedded to these numbers. I'm wedded to $600 million as the amount necessary to have a successful transportation funding bill. But we're wide open to how that's achieved, as long as it's real money.
You And in this scenario, the local match or the state match for light rail would come from surplus then?
Well, the money for light rail would be available from the money for the Metro Transit without restrictions on how it'd be used. You know, if legislators want to push Southwest Light Rail over the cliff, as Lieutenant Governor says, you know, leave all that federal money to go somewhere else and put all those passengers on the highways. You know, my request, the Met Council did an analysis of what's the alternative to the Southwest Light Rail line. And there isn't. There's not a rapid bus transit route you can draw on paper that could supplant Southwest Light Rail. So it's Southwest Light Rail or throw all those people, additional people onto the highways and add to the already excessive congestion in those areas. So it's, again, it's fine, you know, it's easy to be against something. And you can score political points by being against something. But one of the responsibilities of the leadership is to lead. And it's to do things that you know are the better interests of Minnesota now and in the future, whether it happens to be politically, you know, popular right now or not. And I challenge the Republican caucus to stand up and solve the transportation funding crisis that we have in this state. I challenge the Senate, the Democrats as well. I challenge them all, 201 of them, to agree to things they don't agree with. But to get real about this, be honest about it, be straightforward, and do it, and get it done. We have one more week, and the people of Minnesota are watching. Are they going to get it done, or are we going to back out of this and go back home with our talking points for re-election next November? And that's the test.
Was Senator Bach on board with this proposal?
He said he wanted to talk with his caucus. They're caucusing this afternoon. He didn't commit. None of the four caucus leaders. I didn't expect them to commit to something until they had a chance to confer with their caucus members.
For you to say get it done when you're never going to be on the ballot again and they're all facing Minnesotans in a few months?
Well, I'm not going to run again to get myself off the hook on that. It is what it is.
Okay.
Other subjects? Okay, thank you very much.